All right. So one thing that I've really been struggling with and walking through lately are appropriate boundaries. And I think when we're in our Christian walk, it's convoluted because we're trying to balance forgiveness and walking in this place of authentic forgiveness, not judging, because we know don't judge lest ye be judged, but also being relational with people who violate our value system or violate boundaries. And what do we do with that? So it's kind of been a hot topic for me recently because number one, I've been walking through it in multiple relationships. Sometimes it's helpful if it's just in one, you're like, okay, this is a one off, but in multiple, I'm like, what is happening? What is the Lord trying to show me right now?
Mm.
So I thought maybe we could talk about it and we could kind of talk about our struggles in that and maybe some victories that y'all have had, and maybe it would minister to me and hopefully some people that are watching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something, man, I've been trying to figure this out for a while because, so when I started pastoring, John Paul said I was going to be pastoring, and that whole process, I started reading all this stuff about leaders and, how do you be a pastor? How do you be a leader? And a lot of it was about boundaries. I remember reading this article about this pastor that was explaining to everybody the right way that you should be a leader. He'd gone out to lunch with the associate pastor one day, and the associate pastor started sharing with him and said, I just want you to know you're my best friend. Like, I really enjoy this relationship, and this is really good. And the pastor stops and he goes, wait a second, but that's not going to work. I'm your boss. I can't be your best friend. And I thought, wait a second. If this is, now he's suggesting that is a good thing. I'm hearing that like, what are we doing? Like, are we actually a family? Are we a church? Like, what does that mean? How can we do this? And then now you've got on the other side of it, there's you can't be best friends with everybody. So how do you figure that piece out? How do you know those that you're actually supposed to spend time with, that you're actually supposed to open up your heart? Who can you trust? How do you, and it has been a struggle. If it's been a passion, it's been something I'm been trying to figure this out for since I started in leadership. That was in 2007 that I read that, and it hit me.
Wow.
And I've not done a really good job at sometimes, and I've done a better job at other times. Put too many boundaries in one place, not enough boundaries in another place. And one of the things I realized with my heart is when I start getting bitter at the people that I'm supposed to minister to, I have let them overtake a boundary that I shouldn't have gotten. I wouldn't be bitter if I'd maintained my own boundaries. It is my problem, not their problem. And so I've just recognized like that. I just want to escape. I just want to get away from here. Like, people are too much. That's my issue. I don't have good boundaries right now. And so that's one of the things I started noticing, like, okay, I've got to pay attention to that. And then looking at where are those boundaries? How do you decide who's safe, and how do you decide really to sow into, and how do you create boundaries? We talk about this all the time. Sabbath. Like, a lot of, most of my friends are people I work with, right? Almost all, really, our close friends, the ones who I hang out with on a regular basis, are all people that, because that's what I think it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be with the people you hang out with. But when it's your Sabbath and you want to hang out in a relationship, how do you do that and then not end up talking about work stuff? And how do you maintain that? I mean, I know we've had conversations. And sometimes it's frustrating, and I understand. It's, on both sides. It's like, we need to deal with this. We can't right now. Yes, I trust. But man, there's a lot to it. It's not a simple answer. It's not a simple question.
I think one thing that I do know that I'm learning is what not to do. And I know that sounds funny, but I think that's bringing me a lot of clarity right now. So in one kind of situation I just had, I didn't do great with boundaries. It's caused all these other issues. And then I'm getting bitter and I'm realizing, I didn't do these boundaries. So I end up having a conversation, and I really do monitor. It's not just, we're supposed to take our thoughts captive so that it doesn't come out of our mouth. So the monitoring really has to start way back here, right? I don't always do a great job of that. So I try to monitor what is coming out of my mouth, like what's the intent of my heart, when I'm doing it. So in safe relationships, I think you can say like, hey, this is a struggle for me in this other relationship, without dishonor, without gossiping, without all of that. Can you kind of help me navigate that? I think that's appropriate. And I think that you don't share it with everyone. I think you have to. So let's just say this isn't happening. So I'll use us as an example. So let's just say we work together and I have an issue with John. An inappropriate place to go would be other people we work with. Because I have other people in my life, why go to someone else that we're both in relationship with, that we're both trying to manage and love and pastor and care for and talk about it? Right. So for me, that's a clear boundary. Okay. If I were to have a problem with John, I need to go to an elder person to me, a mentor, something like that, not necessarily. And sometimes the person could be connected, but not in that like day to day, because it positions him or me. It's triangulation. Right. Yeah. And so we know what that leads to. It's a foothold for the enemy. It's a door, So I think it's the posture of my heart. So I just had this conversation last night because I had an appropriate boundary. I had an appropriate conversation. And then I allowed myself, I'm tired. I'm about to travel internationally. I've worked every night, like late into the night, wee hours. So you hear what I'm doing. I begin to justify what's happening in my heart. Like, I'm tired. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I can't believe I'm dealing with this same thing over and over again, and I don't have capacity for it, And so I'm just like, I'm tired. I can't believe I'm dealing with the same thing, and I don't have capacity. Like, that's what comes out of my mouth. Man, I cannot go to sleep. I wake up this morning. I'm like, it's a heart posture, because the difference in those conversations was, the first one was, what are we going to do to resolve this issue? And the second one was, feel sorry for me. You see the difference in that? And so I think when we're talking about boundaries and we're talking about relationships, what I'm learning not to do is take that stuff. I have to check my heart first. Yeah. And so in important relationships, if we don't check our heart and see where are we in this? What is my response telling me about me? What do I need to do to figure out what's going on in my heart? There's no way that we can approach those boundaries, those relationships from a place of what God would intend for the relationship, of a place of wanting healing, of a place of wanting, the word, I'm going off. We're going to talk about forgiveness, but when we forgive other people, the intention is to bless them. If I can't be in that place when I'm having the conversation, I have violated boundaries, or I've allowed them to violate boundaries, if that makes sense. And so this morning, I just had to go back to the person that I had the conversation with and say, I was wrong. Please forgive me. I repent. I'd like to repent to the Lord in front of you, because I'd like for you to know how repentant my heart is, because I don't want to reap what I have just sown. Does that make sense? I want it to die at the foot of the cross, and I'm going to ask for a divine exchange.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
So good.
It's in this season as well. Like, there's a proverb where it says to know the condition of your flocks, right? And that can apply to like finances, a whole bunch of stuff, but I've been really applying that to relationships. Like, what relationships do I really have? Who do I have history with and know like present relationship? Because what happens is, when there's expectations on a relationship where there's no real substance, that's disappointment, that's frustration, that's anger. And so I've kind of just been doing a little 360 on my world. Like, okay, these are people that I did life with in this season, but I don't actually have current relationship with. So I'm not going to really talk with them about stuff that's going on in my life right now, because they're not invested. And that's okay. And that's been really difficult, being in leadership, being in ministry. You kind of have this sense like everybody's got to have access to like your innermost world. Like, it's called vulnerability, and you do it from the pulpit. But what it's kind of done for me personally, it caused my heart to become hard. Because what happened was, all of a sudden, everybody has an opinion about you, about how you do this, X, Y, and Z. And that got so ingrained in my heart, where I was like, cool. There was a whole bunch of other wild stuff, which we don't have time for. But there was a whole ecosystem of pain connected to that, where I just began to, okay, moving gifting, not going to have genuine relationship. I'm not going to have, I stopped having care for the people that I was ministering to.
Yeah.
It was like, it was out of obligation. It was out of function. Now, the Lord's so kind. He used it. He blessed people. There's some great testimonies from that season. But what I've kind of come out of is, where do I really stand with people?
Yeah.
Like, am I just, people have used me as a gift, not as a person.
Yeah.
So there's an unhealthy dynamic there for me. And because we throw in this word honor, all of a sudden access is way more frequent than not. Like, oh, they're a leader. I have a tendency to question myself when a leader is wrong. I must be wrong. That's my first point. In relationship, that's kind of normally where I'll start is, well, obviously I've got something wrong. There's miscommunication or there's a different value being communicated. It's probably my fault is where I normally start with. And it's been this painful process of, no, my discernment's good. That was off. No, I know the scriptures in this area. That was off. And actually having permission to be able to question and leave those things behind, not come into accusation, not come into judgment, not because sadly in the church we have a lot of low level gossip that normally starts with, just so you can be praying. That I have seen, and we don't think that that's gossip, but what's beginning to happen is like part of, for me personally, that I've been asking is, do people actually have sincere care for me? Do they have a value for my gift?
Yeah.
That's been kind of the struggle. So the way that I'm observing relationships, myself, other people in the season is like, okay, like we don't do a very good job of being confidential anymore.
Yeah.
It's not an accusation, it's just an observation. Like we make really off the cuff statements to people. Like, you know, are you guys never going to have kids? You have no idea what kind of path someone's walked through. And so all of this is this ecosystem in my world where I'm like, we really think we have access to one another, probably because of social media, another topic, that we don't really have. So I have a lot of people who are trying to like have familiarity with me, have access, have opinion, but I'm like, you're not invested.
Right.
And to be honest, you don't really know who I am.
Yeah.
So that's my hard balance in this season is, who do I have in relationship that's not only safe, but it's also an appropriate place to actually process certain things.
Yeah.
But who do I have in my world that has really just been a past season, has really been a ministry function, and hasn't really been fellowship in the spirit?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Definitely. This is something that I've been walking through too. And I've very much been in a season where boundaries are having to shift. And something that I'm learning is that I think we have a tendency to go, okay, this is what my boundaries look like with this person. But I fully believe now that it's seasonal. Your boundaries with that person change as they change. And I've reached a point now where I've gotten to know myself enough to realize that I am the person that if you want to just keep stabbing me, I will let you. That is my go-to. I will let you say horrible things to me and I will love you through it. And so because I know that, that's something that I'm healing with the Lord, and he's helped me to establish these kind of checkpoints in relationship now, questions that I ask myself. And doing this helps me to regularly evaluate, okay, what am I allowing in my life? What am I allowing to affect my peace from the Lord? What am I allowing to impact, my state of mind, my outreach with other people? And so the first is, what box do they fit in?
Yeah.
That is the foundational question. Am I talking to you as if you're a best friend and you're an acquaintance? Did we meet, 2 months ago? Or have you really journeyed through the depths of life with me? Because those are two very different things. Another thing is recognizing that people are not always their best selves. And so the hardest thing for me to reach is that I can love someone and have so much grace and compassion for their season, while also recognizing you are in a very unhealthy season. And that means that our relationship cannot look the way that it did. And we have to take steps back, not because I don't love you, not because I don't forgive you, but I can't make you be well. That's your decision. That's something that you have to work through with the Lord. And sometimes that is the hardest thing to do. And I want to talk about that later with forgiveness, because I feel like that plays a huge role. But that's another big question. In this season, do they need to have the same access to me as they did 2 months ago? Because that needs to fluctuate. And then another thing that I have seen is, how do I feel when I leave? When I walk away from an encounter with that person, do I feel refilled? Do I feel like I just had good fellowship? Or am I consistently leaving downhearted? Am I leaving stressed? Am I leaving anxious? And you look at those consistent patterns, because somebody could have been a consistent sense of joy for you 2 months ago. And now you're leaving and you're having serious just weight on your spirit. And that's not necessarily speaking ill of that person, but it's recognizing this is not good for me. So something needs to be put in place here. If I'm seeing this pattern, it's those little questions that I ask myself of, okay, where do you fit? Okay, what season are you in? Okay, how do I feel when I walk away from spending time with you? And then the last thing that's been major for me is it's hard depending on the relationship. For me, just different seasons I'll share. I currently am in my 20s. I'm finishing up school. I live with my family. Okay. And so I have a dynamic with my wonderful Jesus-loving parents where I have to figure out what do boundaries look like with you now as an adult living in your home. How do we find a healthy dynamic? I'm also in a season where all of my friendships are leaving because I'm graduating. What does our relationship need to look like? I'm also going through a breakup, right? So it's like evaluating your life, looking at your different spheres and going, all right, Lord, how am I? How am I handling this? What needs to change?
Yeah.
And if you're seeing these negative patterns, then a boundary is not in place that needs to be, or a boundary has been abused or ignored.
Yeah.
For sure. Sorry.
Go ahead.
For sure. I think my one caution with all of us, what I just heard all of us kind of say though, and my biggest caution is we need to also be asking the Lord, are we viewing people through the right lens and not through lies that we are believing? Because
absolutely,
it is easy to.
There's the heart filter coming.
Yeah.
Come on,
I
that's
can't help
good.
it.
No, it's good.
I'm like, sorry, lie. You know what I'm saying? Like a lie about what we're believing about ourselves.
Yes.
And that's really what I'm talking about, our identity lies. So one of the things, Daniel, that I heard you say was people are using me just for my gift. And what can happen in that is that can become the lie that you're believing, and it can become this core lie. And now we're evaluating everyone else through that lie, through that lens. So we have sort of this filter. So now let's say you and I were building a friendship and I just go, do you have anything on that? And you're like, oh, I knew it. I knew it was coming. There's the person kind of looking for my gift or whatever. So I think my caution to all of us in this situation is, okay, Lord, is there a lie that I'm believing or filtering through? That would be another question that I would ask before I evaluate the situation and this person. And then secondly, the other thing with that is that the other question we need to ask is, am I called to minister to this person?
Right.
Because if our filter is, do I come away feeling okay, but we're called to minister to them, I make a joke inappropriately, and I thought about it I just did a podcast episode yesterday, and I was like, we minister to what? People, people are involved. And I kind of make that joke too much because what it's saying is people are difficult and hard, and then that somehow makes our life difficult and hard. But when the grace is there and God has called us to minister to them, it's okay to be hard. It's not always going to be easy because we've got to do hard with people to help them come to the place that God's calling them to be. And even in that, I just, again, and I'll be quiet with the heart part. But yesterday in the interview, I was saying, God's done more ministry in me in the ministry room for other people in many ways than he's done with me directly, where I see him show up and over again. And I would have missed it if I would have had that filter on of, whatever lie I was believing, number one, and number two, if it's difficult, I don't want to enter in.
Yeah. It's part of thinking about it's difficult. Like, how do I feel when I come away from this conversation? So this is how I feel. Now, is that me or is that them?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
That
A lot of times, not all the times, a lot of times I find that there's expectations. So I've become very aware of expectations because I had a bunch of expectations I didn't realize that I had. And I was creating pain for people, creating pain for myself. A lot of disappointment when you expect things and nobody's agreed to do it and then they don't do it. You get disappointed. They have no idea anything's going on. So I'm very sensitive to when people have expectations of me. And some of that's, from past growing up in the family that I grew up, I had a lot of expectations that were pushed on me. And so I developed a lot of defense mechanisms. So if somebody wants something from me, I've got all kinds of great ways to put up my boundaries. But those are the wrong boundaries. Those are self-protection boundaries. Those aren't boundaries for the sake of relationship, for the sake of my primary relationship, which is Jesus. My secondary relationships, which is my marriage, and then my close friends that I have given my heart to, that have given their heart back to me. Like, my boundaries are to protect those relationships. They're not just to make me feel better and make me not have to deal with pain. And I think that's one of the things that we miss when we talk about boundaries. We start thinking about boundaries as a way to avoid pain. And instead of boundaries, we're building walls. And boundaries are very different than walls. I mean, you take a look at, and we use some biblical language, boundary markers that were put around property. They were stones that were put up at certain places so you could recognize this is where the but you could just walk right across. It wasn't even a small wall. It were just stones that were put to recognize this is the borders of the property. They were markers that you could see there's a boundary here. A wall was put around the city so nobody could get in unless you wanted them in. And if we start thinking about boundaries as walls, and we have this idea of boundaries that actually are walls, we're going to end up very lonely and very bitter.
Absolutely.
We're end up hurting people for the sake of my boundaries. Like, I've got to take care of me. And there's this, I think we talked about this one of the episodes, the worship of self, the false idol of self. Like, if my boundaries are just a way that I can protect my idol of me, like I have this picture of who I want to be and what my life is going to be like. And I'm not going to let anything into my life that doesn't fit into my picture, because I am God, period. We never say it that way. We leave the last sentence off.
But we live that way.
The rest of it we actually say.
Yeah.
I mean, you got like books and blogs and videos on how to be successful. And they will tell you, you want to be successful, you control your life, you control who you let in, what you do, you control. And that's how you get successful. Be God and you can be successful. But there's this problem with God is he actually thinks he's God. And so he throws these interruptions into our life, and sometimes those beautiful interruptions of the people.
Yeah.
And we find these people, like I can think back over my life. I have people that when they came into my life, I'm like, oh, they need a lot. And it was my insecurity. I felt powerless because what they needed was beyond what I could do. And if I get too close, if I try too much, I'm going to be a failure again. I can't handle it. And so just the little thing. Now that's all internal. I never admit any of that. Completely refusing to let any of that come in.
Right.
But now I look back on some of those relationships and I have genuine affection and genuine friendship with these people. And I didn't fix them. I stopped trying to fix them and I started trying to love them.
Amen.
And I found out that I could do that. When I thought of myself, because sometimes my problem is people trying to interact with my gift. But my biggest problem is me trying to interact with people through my gift.
Yeah.
And that, when I've done that,
It's good.
I've violated boundaries because I've got to prove how gifted I am. I can fix that for you. Let me in. I'm going to invest everything in you. You're not the assignment that God gave me, but you're going to be a great testimony that I can share with my friends.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it makes me sick to my stomach. Like,
Yeah.
like I have a visceral reaction thinking about that and how ingrained that gets without even realizing. Because somebody would have told me I was doing that, I would have argued them to their face.
Mhm.
Now I look back to where I was 15 years ago, and that's exactly what I was doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
And I'm learning from Charity because I'm listening to the common thread as she was. A lot of us started off talking about ministry relationships.
Yeah.
That's our default.
Yeah.
So what does actual friendship
Come on.
Mhm.
look like in that context? Because once you get into the ministry world, everything's kind of networking. Like there's kind of an unspoken, like, if you'll scratch my back, I'll scratch your back.
Yeah.
Like, we get the visiting ministers, oh, let me give you my phone number. Let's stay in contact. And that becomes like a little notch on our spiritual belt and all of that stuff. That has been my MO without noticing it. Not anymore, but part of that, like you said, the filter of everyone's after my gift, the Lord dealt with that really strongly, where I began to measure my friendships, not ministry, but friendships. Does this person make space at the table for who I am in Christ? Has become my litmus test of friendships.
Yeah.
Is there room for me at the table?
Yeah.
Not what you want me to be,
Yeah.
not what you hope me to be,
Yeah.
not even who I hope I am, but actually what God has put inside of me. Because that's that thing you said, you're connecting with people and we all have a ministry default. But ministry is tiring if you actually don't have friends.
Right.
Because everything is like
It's awful.
purpose driven and it's not fellowship, it's not covenant. And so that witness of the Spirit, when I meet with somebody, when I'm hanging out with somebody, if I feel drained, according to Watchman Nee, it's because I've had fellowship with their soul and not with their spirit. And that's there is ministry needs. We need to have those moments. Some of those ministry moments, they are the most taxing. And I'm like, cool, bye. I'm going to go eat some Cheetos, switch off my phone. See ya. But the thing that I'm learning in this season is when there is a strong witness in the Spirit, when there is a love for Christ at the center, I come away feeling charged. I remember it was probably maybe the first or second time we sat in your office and drank coffee, and I just talked about Jesus, and we both wept.
Yeah.
Because
it's beautiful.
Because there was room at, like, John, you do an excellent job of making room at the table for people.
Absolutely.
So that's been part of my redemption in terms of friendships, leaderships, is you make room at the table. That's incredibly healing. It's not even anything that we needed even necessarily actively do. It's when you actually create space for true connection, there's so much healing that happens without intention.
Yeah.
It's
I agree.
literally an overflow of being joined in Christ. Like we're competing for like this weird thing called the microphone, but we're called to be one body.
Yeah.
And part of my process of disentanglement from ministry desire is I just want real friends, people who actually love him, could care less. Like if anyone ever hears anything that I have to say, there are people that value and love me in my world that actually make my world better. They reveal Christ to me through their affection and through their space. Does that make sense? Like that's been more healing than like, oh, I've got this celebrity person's, I've got a bunch of them in my phone. Don't really care. Could lose my phone and be totally okay. You know why? Because I have him.
Absolutely.
That's been the real shift in heart posture. I'm not, I could go on for hours on that, but
I love what you just shared on that. And going back to something you said earlier, Charity, I think for me, what's so important is, am I entering a ministry moment expecting a friend? Or am I entering a ministry moment expecting a movement of the Holy Spirit where it is just about how the Lord wants to pour into this person? Because for a very long time, I had this belief that me relationally, like you, that I was just a tool for the Spirit to use for other people.
Right.
And that's all people wanted from me. That's all I was good for. And that lie will rear its head sometimes. And I have to take a step back and go, okay, who am I allowing in my mind to be a close friend that doesn't need to be one? And there are people in my life who I have to set aside as, I love this person, but they are a ministry friendship. They're not a mutual friendship. And I feel like those are two very different things. There are people in your life that the Lord puts there that I am called to pour into you in this season, to mentor you, to love on you. And then there are the people that you walk away from conversations at the table where you're just talking about the Lord and you're just so full of the Spirit. So that question of how do I feel when I walk away, I want to clarify that is not a matter of, is this person serving me? No. It's a question of, is this a relationship that is currently healthy within its box? Boundaries are for both people. Walls are for just you.
Yeah.
So if you are setting up something and you're only doing it to protect you, that's a wall. If you're setting up something and it is to protect the health of both people and the health of the relationship, that is a boundary. So asking yourself those questions so that when you do have those good relationships in your life, you can honor them and you can really facilitate that health in that relationship, because it is so, so easy to fall into those other pitfalls if you're not careful. And being someone who tends to give too much, I have to look at it from another perspective, because my tendency is to ignore because I love that person. And I've seen this a lot, especially with women in ministry. I feel like this is a real issue because we have very empathetic hearts. We have a tendency to overgive and over allow. And love becomes enablement. And we allow levels of abuse and then go, well, they never meant that. That's not their heart. I never said it was their heart. They could never want to hurt you. But are they hurting you? Ask those questions. And the last thing that I want to say is I think that it's so important in relationship, at least what I have learned, is that can I have a conversation with this person and go, hey, something is wrong, or I was upset by this, or hey, I think I came across wrong. Can we sit down? Can we process this and leave with a healthier understanding of each other? Or is this a relationship where that is not able to be done? Because for me, the first instinct is not a boundary. The go-to is a conversation, always. If I'm walking away and something is not right, we need to talk. Something's not right. I mean, before that, I ask the Lord. But as far as within that person, it's, okay, something is not healthy here. And that's something that I love about one of my absolute best friends, because her and we will stop in the middle of walking across a field and go, we need to have a conversation. And we will hash it out in 3 minutes and it's done. And our relationship is healthier. I have other people in my life, they can't do that. They want to stew for 2 weeks. Love them. That is not me judging them at all, but that's not healthy for me. And so when I see them doing that, I have to take a step back and go, okay, we need some distance here while you process, because if I'm around you and you're holding on to that tension, it's not good for my soul. And so recognizing that, because then I'm going to say things that I don't need to say, and I'm going to lash out, or I'm going to respond in a way that does not reflect the Lord. And that's where it goes back to those boundaries, honoring both people and protecting the future of that relationship, at least in my mind.
I think we should do a part 2.
Yeah.
I think we should pause, actually, and because I think we've done a really good job of defining, like, what are boundaries? Why do we need boundaries? But what do we do when boundaries have been violated? I think everything that you're saying right there, I'm like, yes, that's so good. But emotionally healthy relationships, like, how do we do that?
Yeah.
So what do y'all think?
I would love to do that.
That's great.
Let's do it.